in the back who are grabbing refreshments, come on down and join us. Come on up to the front. Thank you all for coming out this evening. My name is Jamie Tomasello. I'm the head of security operations and compliance here at Duo Security. And I'd like to welcome our guest speaker, Martijn Grooten, who is the editor of Virus Bulletin. He's been in the email security space for over a decade and has been somebody who's been focusing on phishing and malware and other types of messaging threats at Duo Security. And I'm very happy I'd like to welcome our guest speaker, Martijn Grooten. Thank you very much for coming out today and looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you. Is this working? Hello? Hello? The green button is on. Okay, he can hear it. Hold on. So I'm holding on. Yeah, no, but I'll 5. 5. Okay, that's easier. Yeah. Hello, hello, everyone. Is it working? You just turned it on. I have 6 now. Hello. Yeah. Hello. Hey, that seems to work. Hello, 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 people in the room. Hello, internet. Okay, so I'm going to talk about phishing, but yeah. But first, I'll talk about myself. So yeah, that's me. That's my Twitter handle. If you want to follow me or just say hello. I'm not. I know many people in security are teenage hackers or think that everyone else is a teenage hacker. I was not. I didn't do any security until my late 20s. Before that, I worked as a mathematician at the university, and I learned a lot there. I learned even more, at least on a personal level, by not finishing my PhD. I know we're in a university town, so yeah, don't try this at home. I spent about a dozen years since working security, which I kind of joined by accident, but really liked, and I'm still enjoying it. Working as an editor for Virus Bulletin. I've actually spent all these years at Virus Bulletin in various roles. I'm currently editor. Virus Bulletin is a small UK-based company with people all over Europe. As my name suggests, I'm actually Dutch. I lived in the UK for quite a few years and have been living in Greece for the past few years. And finally, I think it's always good to say something about oneself. So last summer, my wife suddenly passed away, which is not great. But also, every talk I've been giving since, or just being a visible member of the security community, at least in part, I'm trying to radiate the idea that I'm having a good life. I really do have a good life. That we as people are far more resilient than we think we are. And also that these things are okay to talk about. I know that in this country, I think it's Mental Health Awareness Month this month. And grief is, one mental health issue that people struggle with. Yeah, so that's okay to talk about. I have in my final slide my email address if you want to talk about the content of the talk. But if you want to talk about this, maybe you're struggling with something yourself and just want some random person with experience to talk about, I'd be very, very happy to do that. So please do reach out if that's what you're interested in. So I've been, Virus Bulletin does a number of things, and one of the things that we do is testing of email security products. When I go to security conferences, people, when I ask people what I do, and I said, I test security products, they say, wow, you're a pen tester. And I said, well, not really. What I do is I just look if they block things, and if they do, I give them a pat on the back, and if they don't, I look disappointed. That's actually more interesting than it sounds, but I'm not going to talk about that. What I'm going to talk about is kind of the same idea, but turning things around and looking at the emails, and from a point of view of which emails, what kind of emails are blocked and which kind of emails are not blocked. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So almost a philosophical question. I mean, if a spam email, like this Viagra email that you see here, if it gets blocked before anyone ever sees it, does it really matter? Is it really an email? And it turns out there's still, I mean, you probably don't see a lot of Viagra spam these days anymore, but there's still millions and millions of these emails being sent every day, except that almost every spam filter blocks them. And in this kind of email, I see that I've been seeing this for months, if not longer. And they use tricks that they've been using for 15 years at least by writing Viagra with vertical bar rather than the I, etc. But still, there's still a lot out there, but almost everything gets blocked. So I'm going to talk about something that is a new kind of email threat that is slightly different from traditional spam. But to explain how that's different, I need to tell a little bit about traditional spam and about email. So email, this is the definition of email. Email allows you to send messages to anyone whose email address you have, doing it very fast. And the traditional definition of spam is unsolicited bulk email. Unsolicited, you can find the definition of email in the send message to anyone. And the bulk is the very fast. So spam is in there. Spam is a feature of email. It's not a bug. The way we have email, spam is part of it. If you want to completely eradicate spam, you need to change email. You need to change one of these properties of email, which I don't think we want, and even then I don't think you really solve the problem. And I think it's helpful to understand this way. So what we can't do is solve the problem, but we can mitigate it, and we have done that. Okay. Okay, there were a few empty slides. I don't know why, probably, but we'll be all right. Okay, so I know what Duo Security, and Duo Security goes on about zero trust. Email in the 1980s was based on a complete trust of everyone. You could write anything in email, who it was from, who it was sent to, what mail servers it had seen, what IP addresses it had seen in its path, and there was no way this was in any way verified. You could just put anything in there. And in a way, this is still the case for email at a very low level. So this is me trying to send an email. I did it, I think, yesterday or 2 days ago. Someone at Duo.com. Duo uses Google's mail server, so I made a connection to Google's mail server. And I said, okay, that's my own mail server there, so that bit is true. But then I said, this email is from billg@microsoft.com, which happens to be the real email address of Bill Gates. And Google said, yeah, okay, that's fine. And then, you know, said a few other commands, and then I start typing the email. And again, from billg@microsoft.com. There's nothing in email itself that says this is illegal. This doesn't comply with the standards. You wouldn't get this email delivered, and I stopped at this point because I didn't want Google to blacklist my mail server. But at a very low level, this is still the case for email. And what we've built, and I'll talk about it later, is something on top of this. So one thing that we have built as an industry is spam filters. You're all familiar with them, but let me tell you briefly how they work. They use a number of techniques, and the most effective one, at least when it comes to blocking the largest number of emails, are IP-based block lists. So a block list of IP addresses of known spammers. I think you can all understand how that works. If you start sending a lot of spam from your IP address, then all the blacklists start listing you, and then you can't deliver any emails anymore. But also a lot of IP addresses are just not supposed to send emails. I checked my home IP address against the Spamhaus blacklist, probably the best known, and it was listed. And it's a dynamic IP address. There's a chance that someone has sent spam from it in the past, but it's far more likely that my ISP in Greece has told Spamhaus these IP addresses should not send emails. They should send email through a third-party mail server, like the one that the ISP offers, or Gmail or whatnot. They shouldn't run a mail server at home, because no one does that. Only spammers do that when they affected your machine. And this actually blocks at least 90% of the emails, of the spam that's being sent. It's just blocked because it's sent from a known spammer IP address, or an IP address that is just not supposed to send emails. There's also domain block lists. So most spam, not all, but most spam has some kind of link in there that you need to click on. So these domains in there are being blacklisted if they are bad, not if they're some spam use google.com or something else. Talk about it later. But most of them, of the links are actually bad, and they end up in block lists. And the same applies to domains used by the spammers in the from address. The most classical way of filtering spam is just looking at the content. There's all sorts of ways to do that, some statistics, all sorts of clever ways. People have been doing this for 20, 25 years now. If it looks like previous spam, then it's going to be blocked. Of course, if there's an email attachment, sometimes if there's a link, this is being scanned by antivirus products that are built in spam filters. Even think like Gmail has its own, or a third-party antivirus product that scans all the emails from Gmail. And there are techniques called SPF, DKIM, and DMARC that I'll talk about in a second. And these are kind of patches on top of email that mean that we can trust more of what is being written in email. All these lies that you're allowed to put in emails. These are kind of patches that help them. You trust them. And I should say that the word spam filter, I find it very helpful actually, especially in this context, but very few people use this word. Everyone calls them email security products these days. So these SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, they do a number of things. SPF lets you as a domain owner, say duo.com or whatever domain you use for your company organization, you can list which IP addresses are supposed to send email from your domain. Like you list all your mail servers there. Or you say, we use Google for email, so check Google's mail servers, something like that. DKIM links an email to a domain in a cryptographic way. Which basically says, and I'll show you examples in practice in the next slide, which is probably more helpful than me telling it now. DMARC is interesting. DMARC lets you as a domain owner say, well, what if you get an email claiming from, say, duo.com, but it doesn't pass SPF and DKIM? Should I still trust it? And let's duo.com set a policy saying, no, always throw this away, or, well, be a bit more careful, but there may be a legitimate reason why this email still came from us. I should make it clear that SPF and DKIM, they don't make a moral judgment on an email. They don't say, this email is not spam. They just say, this email is indeed from who it claims to be. It's a little bit like a passport. So this is what my passport looks like. I used this passport to enter the United States yesterday. My passport doesn't make any claims about me being a criminal or not, or about me being a terrorist or not. But it makes it clear that this is me, more than my business card does, which can be faked. So the US border agents could then check my name, my details against their database and find out that indeed I'm not a criminal or a terrorist. Well, I would say that anyway, but and that's why I let me in the country. So it's something like that. You kind of want, just like you want all criminals and terrorists to use passwords with their own name, you kind of want all emails to use SPF and DKIM, even if they're spam. This is an example. I was sending this email to a guy at Duo to arrange this talk. Because we also use Google. Google hopefully lets you show details of the email. And I'll make it a bit bigger. The email from Eldridge at the duo.com email address came from this IP address 209.85, etc. And this is actually an IP address listed by duo.com as one of its mail servers. And it was also signed cryptographically by duo.com, which means that it passed through Duo's mail server. These two together, SPF and DKIM, mean that Google, which we use, could be very certain that this email came indeed from duo.com. So this means that they can trust the from address, not the fact that the email itself has some kind of verification for that. And DMARC, in this case it passed because both SPF and DKIM passed, but if they had failed, DMARC would tell Google what to do with this email. So the feedback loop and anti-spam or spam filters, how do they spam filters learn to get more spam? Well, learn to get better or to detect newer spam. Well, what happens is they for example, they see an email from a known spammer's IP address they've not seen before. There's a domain in there that's new, just registered but not seen before. Well, they assume this domain is a spam domain. They add it to their domain blacklist. They assume that the content is spam, so the content gets automatically added to the content filtering in some kind of funny way. It's a bit more complicated than that, but this is basically how it works. By receiving spam, they are better at detecting spam. So the more spam they get, the better they are. So the more emails in a domain, in a campaign, the better detection of this campaign gets. That is a very crucial thing to understand email-based threats and to understand classical spam. We have made spam scale very badly. When I started looking into email security about a decade ago, there were still people who thought that maybe spam would at some point kill email. Spam was growing, spam kept growing at least until 2008, 2009, and people thought it can grow forever. So there was the general belief was, well, okay, you have a spam campaign with 1 million emails and 99.9% get blocked, but it's still 1,000 emails getting through. And if that's not enough for the spammer, well, I can send 10 million emails or 100 million emails and then get 10,000 or 100,000 emails through. And at some point it's enough for them, and they have botnets available, so they can really, they can send as much as they want to get the right amount of emails delivered. So at some point email will die. There were lots of people, clever people, who thought this would happen. What instead has happened, okay, maybe you can get 1,000 emails delivered from your 1 million spam campaign, but if you make it a 10 million spam campaign, because spam scales so badly, you can only get 2,000 or 3,000 emails delivered. I mean, these are ballpark figures, but just to give you an idea. So spam scales very badly, and this is why we have, well, not solved spam, but we've mitigated it very well. In security, we always aim for perfection. We really underestimate mitigation. And it's not just in spam, but in security in general. There are a lot of ways in which we're very good at mitigating and very bad at solving a problem. And we focus maybe too hard solving a problem, and we should focus on mitigating it. Okay, so there's a classic Dilbert joke about phishing. I should make it clear that when I talk about phishing, in this talk, I'm talking about the emails getting through your inbox. I'm not talking about that people click on links, what they do, and I'm not going to say things like people are stupid, because I think people make very rational decisions when they fall for phishing. So that's kind of beyond this talk, the psychology of why people fall for this. But I definitely don't think they're being stupid. So phishing means different things. I'm using a very broad definition in this talk, including classical phishing, which is just an email with a link to a site that steals your credentials. You know, an email from your bank, or from someone claiming to your bank saying, please click here to update your details, and you click here and you're asked your credit card details and your social security number and whatnot, and it turns out that it's fake and they use it to empty your bank account. It doesn't happen very much at banks anymore these days, because most banks have decent security, that, although I still see some bank phishing, but most have decent security, so that just stealing credentials doesn't really help you empty bank accounts. But it does happen a lot with PayPal, where, of course, if you don't use proper security on PayPal, a password is enough to steal funds. It does happen a lot with Netflix. Netflix, very popular phishing. It does happen a lot with email credentials itself. And I'll mention this, go back to it later briefly. There's also email with links to malware, links that download malware. I'll show examples later on, but typical example is, please see the order invoice here, click this link, and if you click it, you download malware. What used to happen in the past, and you don't see this enough, we don't see this a lot anymore, is email with links to Driveby downloads, where you would click on it and would automatically download the malware. These days, almost always, you still need to open something and accept something. But there was a time when it was very popular for emails to link to Driveby downloads. And there's email with malware actually attached to it as an attachment. I think that we sometimes overestimate how the average audience understands the difference between links and attachments, but I think this audience probably understands that an attachment is something different. But I'm not sure if my relatives would always understand that. And maybe we as security professionals should not be just smug and assume that everyone understands it. So, and there's also various funny combinations of these. For example, what you see quite a lot of is an email with an HTML attachment, like a web page attached, that if you open that, it asks for your credentials. So there's an attachment that does phishing. Or I've seen funny cases where there's a Word document attached that isn't actually malware, but there's a link in there that if you click on it, you download another Word document that is malware. I don't know why they do this, but I've seen this. There's all sorts of funny combinations. But all of these in this talk I will refer to as phishing. And what I'm not talking about is spearfishing, which is like, spearfishing is when you really want to get a specific person or a small group of people within an organization. You craft an email specifically targeting them. You have generally quite a lot of resources available, so you can make the email very credible for this particular person. You can register a specific domain. You can maybe you even know what kind of email security product they're using, so maybe you know how to bypass this. You can test this a bit. And the reason why I think this is different in this context is that I think if you're trying to spearfish something, you have enough resources, then you can get to their inbox. You can bypass email security products. It's more complicated if you want to then install malware. There's some steps to be taken. If you have serious protection, that is not trivial, but this bit you can do that. And this gentleman is John Podesta, and I think you may have heard of him. He ran the 2016 campaign for Hillary Clinton, and he famously got phished by a Russian hacker group called Fancy Bear. The story actually, and because I think that is a helpful story, so let me briefly tell you what happened, because it's not always well reported. John Podesta was using a Gmail account for his work, which he was sharing with a few assistants. So the shared Gmail account had a shared passwords. It was not actually John Podesta himself who fell for it, but one of his assistants. And she did the single best thing you can do if you're not sure about an email. She asked advice from an IT expert, who rightly said this email, do not trust this email, or something like that. But he left out the word "not" by accident, and then yeah. He used different. I forgot the right phrasing, but it's a very unfortunate typo. But yeah, the single piece of advice I always give to people: if you're not sure, don't do things like look for the padlock or check the domain name. Just ask for advice. Ask some expert for advice. Make sure that if you're in a, if you're running if you work in something very sensitive like a political campaign, make sure you have IT experts on your team that you can trust. You can ask for advice. And yeah, of course. Unfortunately, that's not the single thing, that's the wrong thing they did. Obviously, they should have used two-factor authentication. They shouldn't have shared the Gmail account. But also, yeah, I kind of get why they did that. But anyway, from a delivery point of view, from a getting to the inbox point of view, this is something different because, yeah, if you're just sending one or two emails, then you're always going to do that. So, if you use links in emails, there's a number of reasons, a number of advantages to this. One is that the links are often not scanned. The content, the URL is usually checked against some blacklist, but the link is often not clicked on by an email security product for a number of reasons. Sometimes it happens, but it doesn't happen very much. You can also control who access it. Like, if you are worried that it's going to be scanned, what you can at least in theory do, and it doesn't happen very often, but I think I've heard cases where this happens, is that you can make sure that the link initially downloads a cat video, which is the time that it's scanned by security products. But when you assume that it's not open until an hour later, you can turn it into malware. One thing that definitely happens a lot is use links on compromised websites or on legitimate domains, like github.com. You download malware from github.com. No one's going to block github.com in an email. Google APIs, Google Drive. There's a lot of this happening. The alternative is to use an attachment. The main advantage to using an attachment is that the malware is in your organization. So like the attachment is there. If it bypasses the email security product, then it's there. Which means that if someone opens it 2 days later, it generally still works. Whereas with a link, it may have to be taken down 2 days later or even an hour later. Delivery rates for malicious email or phishing emails with links tend to be higher than with attachments. The attachments are more likely to be blocked because there is the malware there. But ultimately, because there's extra step to be taken of the malware to be downloaded, I think in the end it's kind of evened out. And I see the same actors switch between links and attachments. I assume they have some idea about what works, so I assume that for them it doesn't really matter either way. So what kind of attachment types do we see? We do not see exe files, Windows executables files. It used to in the past. This was very common. This is of course the most classical way to spread malware. But no email security product is going to allow you any kind of exe files. Even if it's notepad.exe, you're not going to get this through. They just block it on site without even scanning it. So that's why they stopped doing this a decade ago. Until fairly recently, like 2 or 3 years ago, I think, JavaScript or other scripting language, similar scripting languages like VB script were very popular as attachments because you clicked on it and Windows ran it. But again, these are blocked on site regardless of content by most products. So the spammers have stopped bothering. Probably the most common attachment type these days is Word documents, doc or docx. And there are two types. The first uses macros. Macros are not enabled by default, but you can be tricked on it. They show a blurred image saying, please enable macros to see the full content. People do that, and then the malware downloads. Because macros is basically running code inside Word documents, and that's how you can then download other stuff. What is also almost worryingly common is vulnerabilities in Office. These have all been patched by Microsoft, often 2 or 3 years ago, sometimes longer. And there are still many people who haven't patched their Office. So yeah, people patch your offices because this is common. This has happened so often, and so it's so common that I've started to know the vulnerability CVE numbers by heart. And this happens not just with ordinary people, home users. This happens in organizations. This happens in people for whom the Chinese government is in their threat model. Organizations in Tibet who should really worry about the Chinese government, they receive email, have been for years receiving email on unpatched versions of Word. Sorry, you don't receive email on Word, but I think you know what I mean. Other Office files happen, like Excel files, PowerPoint occasionally. Many kinds of archives, like zip and other archives. There are many obscure archive formats that are still opened by WinZip or WinRAR, which means that if people double-click on it, the attachment is opened. You get to see the content, and you can then click on it. Some of these are not scanned by the AV scanner built in the email security product, so that's probably why they're using it. One interesting attachment, very obscure format, is a very old format called ACE, ACE. It's interesting. I had been seeing people using this in spam just as one of these obscure attachments that may not be scanned. And then a few months ago, Checkpoint, a security company, they found a vulnerability in WinRAR implementation of the ACE unpacker. And this vulnerability, ACE is such an old format that WinRAR had lost the original source code for this bit. So they just removed the ACE library. But a lot of people are using vulnerable WinRAR, and both in more mass market spam campaigns or in extremely targeted email spearfishing campaigns, people have been using those ACE files that exploit WinRAR. There's a question, yeah?
Do you see a lot of chimeric files that use zip or archive formats anymore? I know that used to be popular. The zip file is also executable. JSON is also.
There's a question about if you see files that are like polyglot files, I think it's called. Yeah, I've seen, which is it's a trick that where by being a bit clever, you get a file that's opened by two products at once. I've seen examples of that. I think it's a good question. I've seen examples where a file is an image if you open it in an image viewer, but it's also a zip file if you open it in WinZip. I've seen it a few times. It's not very common, especially not in email attacks, but it does happen. Yeah, they're called polyglots. And there are people who make a hobby out of doing things like that. And finally, I've made it gray for a reason. PDF is very rare these days for malware. There's very few malware in PDFs. There's malware. So there are attachments in PDF where there's just a link, and you need to click the link in the PDF. I'm sure that if there's a big vulnerability found in Adobe Reader or another reader that's widely used, then the people will start using this again. So that's why I wanted to mention this. But there hasn't been something like this for a while, and I've not seen any serious malicious PDF files. It's easy, it's easy to, if you work in security, to be smug and think, yeah, why does anyone allow macros? You can block macros at an organization level. You can say no one in the organization uses macros. But macros, people find this very helpful. And I got this email from a security company whom we sent a Google document. I won't name them, obviously. And we sent a Google document, and they say, can you please send it again as a Word document, because our team uses macros. And it's fair enough. I mean, I don't know what a team uses it for, but I'm sure they also made the decision that for them it worked. But yeah, it also gives it top security. So phishing differs from spam in more than one way. Phishing, as I define it, it's different from Viagra because it has a malicious intent rather than just commercial or scam. But phishing differs in more than one way, and that's kind of the core of my talk, and that's what I'm going to talk about in the next 10 minutes or so. And I think it's best shown by two examples I see in our lab. You know, and this lab is the lab where we test security products. I know this is small, you don't have to read it. Last month, on a single day, I received 3,500 copies of this email in our lab. And we receive maybe 20,000 emails. So that's about between 10 and 20%, maybe a bit more, of all emails in a single day were of the same campaign. And this campaign it's very popular. It's called sextortion. The idea is basically to tell you, hey, we know we installed malware on your PC, and we know that you've been watching pornography, and we're going to share what you've been watching and what you've been doing while you were watching it to all your friends and family. But if you give us like $715 to this Bitcoin address, then you're not gonna. Then won't do that. Which some people apparently fall for it, but there's a lot of these emails out there, and most of these emails, especially in this particular campaign, no single product in our lab, out of more than 20 products, missed even one of these 35,000 emails.
The one that's more interesting variant than that is they come from somebody who's broken into another site, grabbed a password with user accounts. So it's got a password that you used on one site.
Yes, there's a variation of this where they use like stolen passwords. There's a lot of sites where you get a combination of a password and an email address, and then they send to this email address, hey, I know this is your password. There's a variation even with phone numbers. Because it's far easier to get email addresses than there is to get email addresses combined passwords. These are lower in volume, these ones with passwords. They're not as common. And also they're still widely blocked because the content is more or less the same. But this one doesn't use a password, so it's almost the same for every single recipient, and therefore it's so widely blocked. But yeah, the password variant is a little bit more credible. But yeah, don't fall for this. On the same, well, no, not on the same day, but the same week, we received one copy of a particular email, which links to malware, and which was missed by 10 products in our lab. That's a little less than half, but that's significant. You know, this email, a lot of people would have received this email in their inbox. So why is it missed? This is in German. It says something credible about a bill that didn't work, and you need to do something to make sure that it still gets paid. Firstly, it was sent from a compromised account, a compromised mail server. Someone had stolen credentials and used this to send this email. So blocking IP address or the domain of the mail server wouldn't help because this is a legitimate sender. Obviously, if this compromised account would keep sending spam, that would get blocked, but not initially. It's probably on a list of known mail servers. And if this mail server used like something like SPF and DQ, it would only confirm that this is really from them. It links to a compromised website. And the content is also normal. I don't know how this particular group writes this content, what they decide, but my understanding of German, and I've seen this in other languages as well, they're really credible emails. There's no spelling mistakes, there's nothing dodgy about it. This is a real email that people can get. And yes, if you look at it very carefully, then you can see things like, okay, it's a Swiss domain, it's a German phone number and a Danish link. And yeah, but if you start adding rules for this kind of thing, then you're probably going to find out very soon enough that there are actually legitimate reasons for people having all these kind of funny combinations. And it's also, so in a way, I'm not surprised that 10 products missed this email. I'm more surprised that actually a lot of products blocked this email, more than a dozen products. But it probably indicates that okay, they probably had seen some of these emails before. This email, by the way, linked to a particular malware called Imhotep, and it's in understanding Imhotep, I need to talk. In understanding email threats, I need to talk a little bit about Imhotep. So there's a tweet from Jessica Payne from Microsoft, who basically says, and I'll get back to this tweet later on, basically says that try to defend against Imhotep, then you can fight against everything else. I'll show the tweet again later. So Imhotep, the spam from Imhotep, it sent emails from compromised accounts, as we saw. Occasionally, the malware itself sends the spam, like the Imhotep infection. Imhotep is infected and has infected the PC. This malware sends the spam, but before doing that, it checks the IP address of of the machine it's on, if it's on blacklists. And if it is, then it doesn't even bother. Cisco Talos found this. When it uses links, and we saw that, it uses compromised websites. Imhotep sometimes uses attachment as well, but also uses links. It's a lower volume than traditional spam, significantly lower volume, has a more targeted recipient set. So for example, this was a German email, probably would only send to .de email addresses, or maybe .ch for Switzerland and .at for Austria as well, but it wouldn't send them to random US-based email addresses. And Imhotep started doing something very clever and very very bad. Well, it's from infected machines. It would steal email threads from mailboxes, Outlook, and things like that, Thunderbird, and it would store them, and it would then use them to reply to the other person in the conversation, or to pretend to reply to the other person in the conversation. So you've been corresponding with someone, and you would get a reply, supposedly from them, and it would say something like, "Oh, here's a document." And there's a lot of email threads for work where it makes sense where here's a document is a valid reply. It's also true that the content of the whole email is something that the spam filter email security product has seen before. It looks credible, so that really makes it harder to block these emails. And apparently, they've been doing this for a while now, and people were saying on Twitter this morning that they started doing this a lot in the last 24 hours. So what does Imhotep actually do? Well, it does two things. It spreads itself, spreads more infections, and it downloads other malware. That is really uninteresting. We like to think of malware as, what does it do? It encrypts all your files. It steals all your files. It turns off the electricity in the country. It makes your centrifuge go faster and therefore destroys your nuclear program. That's a Stuxnet joke. But Imhotep doesn't do any of these. It just downloads other malware. And actually, in the past, Imhotep stole banking credentials and tried to steal a bank. But it does something which seems more basic. Except if you think about it, it's extremely clever. I don't know if any of you is a vulnerability researcher, but for vulnerability researchers, like the holy grail is to get remote code execution in a product, being able to execute code on a product. What Imhotep does is it has remote code execution on an infected network. If you're infected with Imhotep, that means that the attacker, those who control Imhotep, can do anything on your network. That's extremely powerful. And they're extremely good at getting these kind of infections, and also monetizing this, or selling it to other people. So Imhotep is not targeted. They're not targeted attacks. They don't target specific organizations. They try to get as many infections as possible, although they realize that maybe they should. It helps them to reduce the volume of the spam campaign, because Imhotep is, as we saw, is orders of magnitude smaller than this extortion spam. But when an opportunity arises, the attack can become very targeted using other malware. So late last year, I don't know if you remember this, there was ransomware attack against the printing press behind the the Los Angeles Times and a few other organizations. They couldn't deliver the paper, at least for a day, maybe longer, because there was a big ransomware attack. The ransomware is called Ryuk, but actually it started with Imhotep, and a company called Cryptid Logic did a nice diagram how did it happen? So it started with Imhotep infections, and Imhotep then, because it could download anything, it downloaded another malware called TrickBot. And Imhotep is good at infecting machines, and TrickBot is good at looking at all the infections and seeing, hey, which ones are more valuable? So the TrickBot actors then realize, hey, this is a printing press. We can probably install some advanced ransomware on this network because we have the infection there. And then they deployed Ryuk. So this is what happened. This happened with other malware as well. Recently, there was a big story about ransomware called Mega Cortex, but also targeted large enterprises. Started with Imhotep, the intermediate, or so people believe. The intermediate was likely another malware called Kakbot. But again, there was a large ransomware for specific victims. So Imhotep, it's fairly large malware as a campaign, but individual infections could cost, and the number is from the US government agency, up to $1 million, just by clicking on a spam email. So again, this Jessica Payne tweet, not only is Imhotep the most advanced of all this kind of malicious phishing that I'm talking about, but what the thing that Imhotep does, like you get a malicious email, you open something, you click on it, you open it, it installs malware, and that installs other malware. This trick is also used by many of the APT groups, many of the more advanced attackers. So if you can defend against Imhotep, or mitigate the threat, then you do a pretty decent job against many more advanced attackers. Now, Imhotep is custom-made malware. The group behind Imhotep makes Imhotep. There's a few other examples. I mentioned TrickBot, Kakbot, something called Drydex. There's a few custom bespoke malware made. Sorry, I said no. It's bespoke malware. It's made by the people in the. Imhotep is malware. I think I'm confusing my word now. Let me just forget the bespoke. Imhotep is made by the actors itself. There's also something called off-the-shelf malware, where you're just a more basic actor, and you can't be bothered, or you don't have the skills to write the malware. You just buy it. And there's a lot of this out there. There's a lot of families. As an organization, if you're defending an organization, this difference doesn't really matter. But it's interesting to know the difference. So last month, Spamhaus, they published a report on botnets, and they said they looked at which botnet had the largest number of control servers. And they say they found almost 1,500 control servers of malware called LockyBot, and more than well over 1,000 for something else called Azuralt. This is malware that you can buy. This probably means that there are at least 1,500 people who have bought LockyBot and are using it in some way, and probably more because I'm sure Spamhaus doesn't see everything. And there's quite a few others that are also there with their own control server. So most of these are also delivered via this kind of phishing campaigns. To give you an example, a guy called Brad Duncan wrote about LockyBot spam in February last year, but there's been more of this recently. I just found this an interesting example. You get an email with an attachment, neworder.zip, and you think it's 1980s post-punk, but it's actually malware. That was a bad joke, I know. And as a result, as an example, I wanted to find one with a link. So here's an example of an email with a Word document, which probably has macros in it. And if you enable these, you download it as a result. And there's a lot of these smaller spam campaigns going around. And this is actually worth keeping in mind. If you, most of what this malware does is steal information from your, steal credentials, steal whatever it can take. Which means that if you have it as an organization, then you have a data protection problem, because someone else has stolen information, probably on third parties. If they're in the EU, you have an issue with the GDPR, but data protection regulations affect people in other countries as well. Including in the US, many states make it a requirement to report this. So if you have like an Azuralt infection, you don't know what they're trying to do, but someone has access to likely personal information stored on your devices. you probably need to report that. So you can buy the malware off the shelf, but you can also buy, you still need to send the email. So you can also send emails as a service. You could just rent someone has a setup, a small botnet or some other servers to send emails. So this is an interesting example of someone using that. I received it a few months ago. And what is interesting about this email is if you look at the attachment, it's called spainleads.txt. Now, txt is not typically a file used for malware. So I was interested and I opened it. This email contained more than 25,000 email addresses. Probably the person sending this campaign uploaded the wrong file. Meant to upload an attachment, but uploaded a list of email addresses, which you should have uploaded somewhere else. I found it interesting because it really gives an insight into the kind of email addresses used in this campaign, this kind of campaign. So I did some research. I put a few dozen in Google. Almost all of them were found on the web, somewhere in a document or on a website, in the form email, colon, with or without a hyphen, and then the email address. So this suggests that someone has been scraping the internet for email addresses. Didn't just want to get an email address, and there's a number of ways why just looking for something that looks like an email address gives you spam traps or other kind of non-existing email addresses. This is a very clever way to make sure that it's a real email address. Interestingly, I did not find any webmail providers in there, like no Gmail, no Outlook, no Yahoo, etc. And I'm fairly certain that they filled them out manually or automatically, but they filled them out. Because I did find one email address in there which ended on outlook.com with a single O and a double K. Obviously a typo, and I did find actually a document where this misspelled email address was on the website. And they didn't deliberately try to avoid Google and Microsoft because many domains were using Google and Microsoft. I got an interesting, I don't know how random this sample was, but Google seems to be, based on this sample, Google is by far the market leader when it comes to hosting email. But just on Microsoft.com, you saw a number of well-known third-party providers, including Cisco, that host a lot of domains. And by doing this, got very few spam traps. Now, 25,000 is small. It's probably even small for these kind of campaigns, but it's a large number. Say you only 10% of it gets delivered, and then 10% gets opened. That's still 250 infections. That's quite a lot. That is, for maybe a few $100 buying the malware and assuming you had uploaded the right malware and buying access to the spam to the delivery panel, spam panel. And the 25,000 is so small that an average organization with 10,000 employees would get maybe on average 1 or 0 of these emails. I mean, so small is this. Oh, and finally, I know the file was called Spain Leads, but there wasn't anything particular Spanish. It was a very international bunch of email addresses. There were some Spanish ones, but there were more German ones or French ones in there. So if you want to be a spammer, and if you want to be one, talk to me afterwards because I'll talk you out of it. But okay, imagine you want to be one. What do you do that? Well, you use compromised email accounts or dedicated mail servers, which you can also set up temporarily. If you only need to send 25,000 emails, then you can probably set up your own mail servers, rent them for a few days, and then destroy them again. Or at least check for IP blacklist. I mean, we saw that Imhotep does that. I'm fairly certain that this happens it's more common, but in Imhotep's case it happened on the client, so it was visible to researchers. But I think that most of these panels actually check these things before sending emails. Use links on compromised websites. That means the link isn't blocked. Keep volume low so that you stay on the radar for antivirus companies for content filters. And also be picky what you send to. I mean, I'm not just saying get 1 million email addresses and choose 25,000 random ones, but by choosing 25,000, you can be picky. You can do what this not so clever spammer had done with email addresses. And that's probably not, I could find ways to improve this, to make it even better. But still, that's a very clever way to be picky, not just send anyone.
So websites, are these all being commoditized? So
Yes, yes. So the question, yeah, this is required. You can't just, yeah, you can't just start with a compromised email account. You need to first compromise it. This is extremely commoditized. So you buy access to compromised email accounts. You buy access to compromised websites, etc. So this is all commoditized. The cybercrime is extremely commoditized. Email threats, malware in general is extremely commoditized. The off-the-shelf examples like Azerworld and Lockybot are great examples of that. And of course, make sure you upload the right file to the spam panel. Okay, compromised email accounts. I mean, as I said before, there's a lot of phishing for compromised email accounts. That's not the only way they're stolen, because malware itself, credential stealers, malware like Azerworld, they steal email credentials as well. But yeah, there's a lot of emails. This, by the way, this is the domain we use for testing. But yeah, you get an email saying your mailbox is 99% full, click here. And you ask, okay, by the way, you need to log in, and you log in and your email credentials are stolen. So what do we see in our lab, where we look at emails from, how much is blocked? Most, and I say almost all phishing campaigns we see these days, and it's malicious email campaigns, they're low volume, and the delivery rates are relatively high. I mean, I gave an example of this Imhotep email, which was blocked by about half, but only by about half the products. I'd say generally it's much lower, but still, what we're talking about, traditional spam, 1 in 10,000 emails, maybe less, get blocked, especially if it's a large campaign. Here we're talking about 1 in 10, maybe. That's still a decent rate. Maybe 1 in 20 sometimes. Yeah, the best campaigns bypass about half the filters in our lab. But I should emphasize the in our lab bit, because when we see something in our lab, that means they've done something wrong, because we get it from third-party companies. I should probably name them, as they're called Abusix and Project Honeypot. They do great work, and thanks to them we get this stuff. But yeah, when it hits them, they've done something not quite right. They sent email to a domain that's already been taken over by, that has expired, a company has been closed, etc. There's probably even better campaigns that we just don't see. And there's actually a lot, part of the thing what I'm talking about is things that a lot of people just don't see, that we don't see, that a lot of people don't see. And traditional spam campaigns like the Viagra spam is almost always blocked. But there is an occasional exception. I was actually working on this, and a few days ago I noticed there's a very large Viagra spam campaign that did a very good job at bypassing spam filters, because it was using compromised WordPress sites for, I couldn't figure out what exactly they'd done, but they seem to have found a way to upload spam modules to WordPress sites. And because these WordPress sites tend to be hosted on legitimate hosters, that doesn't immediately get you blocked. For a Viagra spam campaign, it was a relatively high delivery rate. So what does it mean if you're a young researcher? Maybe one of you want to start. There are a lot of these campaigns out there. There are hundreds of different campaigns every day, because all this off-the-shelf malware needs to be sent. It's great to start researching this. It's fairly low entry. You don't have to be a malware analyst. You can just find some of these emails. One email is enough, really. Follow the link, see what happens, download the malware, open it in a sandbox. There are tools available online. You don't have to have anything on installed, and you can write about it. Start a blog about it, and maybe you find that could be your entry into security. And if you want to start doing this, please reach out. I'm happy to help happy to help you start in security this way. If you work at defending an organization, you run email security at your company, or you work at a SOC, or you just run security in general, some things will slip through. Your email security product, no matter how good it is, no matter how much the marketing department told you how great it is, some things will slip through. And because there are so many of these small volume threats, they slip through to everyone. There are things that you just won't see, that you don't realize, but you also can't look at later on based on threat intelligence feeds. I mean, sometimes you get these feeds and you can see, hey, I scan my network for certain traffic. But there's just some things that just won't show up because they just stay under the radar well enough. And that matters. So do build your defense based on the fact that people do get in, malware will end up on our network. This information stealing malware, Emotep, we may get Emotep. Try not to completely, you need to fight Emotep because Jessica Payne is really right about that. But don't try to think we can block all Imhotep from reaching our network. Also fight Imhotep by assuming Imhotep will get in, and how can we fight it then? If you're someone with opinions, don't be impressed by volume. Don't just say, oh, this is a large campaign. And especially don't be impressed by the volume of a spam campaign before taking spam filters or email security products into account, because everyone uses these, every organization has these. It's very unimpressive that there are large Viagra spam campaigns because everyone blocks them. And maybe we should come up with a new name for this kind of phishing, this kind of spam, that is still massive, but much, much more targeted, much less massive than the traditional spam campaigns. And I think, well, I hope I've explained why this is different. And compromised accounts are a pain in the backside. And I mean, we're at Duo Security. They do a great job at making sure that your account don't get compromised. But this is about compromised accounts on the other end. So I get an email from you, and thanks to SPF and DKIM and email set up properly, I can probably be reasonably certain that it did come from your mail account. But making the jump from your mail account to you is very hard. And we're not very good at this. And we see this not just in email, but for example in DNS as well. There's compromises where we can be certain that this DNS was indeed set up properly, but we're not sure if someone might be hacked into the registrar, and there have been cases of this recently. Hey, we're done. Well, no, we're done. So, but I'm very happy to answer questions. I see questions already there. So
Right here. Right here.
Got it. All right, here you go. You can please speak into the catch box.
Wow.
Fancy today. I was just curious how you class sort of data mining and verification through some of the things like because they don't necessarily catch links. A lot of spam will verify, one, that your email exists and that you exist, and two, if you even like do the hover over, like I think Mac OS does the hover over where you can sort of see a preview of where the link goes. They can potentially verify who you are through click through and use your email address for various things, and increase the amount of, just the different kinds of using unsubscribe. So let's say you get an American Eagle Outfitters email that's been spoofed or whatever, and someone unsuspectingly says, oh, I don't want to be on this mailing list, and they click subscribe, for example. How do you respond to a lot of that in terms of like where this fits in with phishing?
So I think the question is, by clicking a link on an email, even if it's unsubscribe, you kind of give away that you're a real person, that you click links in email. I have seen unsubscribe links to malware. I haven't seen this in the last 5 years. I think in general, it's more of an urban legend that I find it hard to give general advice because I've seen a link to malware, but in general, if the sender looks half legitimate, it's probably safe enough to unsubscribe. I know you give something away about yourself, but you give away a lot on the internet. Also, from this point of view, it doesn't really matter that you exist. They know you exist. They probably have ways to target you in other ways. So,
I know for there's a second level of confirmation.
yeah.
Like the one, they already have your email address. The second part is when you click the link, they sort of realize that some human or another bot is on this link and verifying a second level of existence.
Yeah, no, that does happen. At the same time, in these targeted campaigns, by using lower volumes, they have other ways to verify your email address. So, for example, they may have obtained your email address because they have a list of subscribers of a certain organization, which gives them enough understanding that you are a real person. So, yeah, it can happen, but it doesn't seem to happen. People have looked into this. It doesn't seem to happen very much as we may think it does. But it's a potentially valid concern. Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to comment on her question there. Some of the customers that I've worked with have solved that challenge, per se, by going directly to the vendor's website and unsubscribing there instead of clicking the email. That's more of, obviously, the paranoid way to do it, but it's the safer way to do it. So if you get an email from American Eagle with all the spam that you don't want, go to AmericanEagle.com, the actual site, and unsubscribe that way. I
think that's true. I also think that's probably, I think it's a very clever idea. I'm a bit hesitant to give it as general advice because it's so complicated. I mean, you have an email, you just don't want it anymore. I believe, and I haven't checked this for a while, but last time I checked, if you click on the link in Gmail, you say this is spam, then Gmail will tell you, actually, oh, they just want to unsubscribe because they have a way to knowing this is a legitimate sender. So that's, if you use something like Gmail, that's probably the safest. Just say it's spam and Gmail tells you, actually, you just want to unsubscribe, and then that's fine. Yeah.
All right, the question I had was, you say you have a lab that you're getting spam to all the time. So do you have a list of all the 20 or whatever anti-spam tools that you are using in your lab? Is there a list somewhere?
There's a partial list because we sometimes write public reports, but some of the products we're testing are we test privately, so we are under NDA and we can't show them. But you know, any email security product is a potential customer of ours. So some of the ones that we've tested publicly include big names like Microsoft, like ESET, like Symantec, like Sophos, and big names. And yeah.
Here you go.
Did you ever see any malware that?
That doesn't help if you're not talking into it.
Oh, it's a microphone.
Yeah, it's a microphone. Just talk right into it.
Lovely.
Yes. It's recorded, so that's why it's helpful that
Do you ever run into any malware that's targeting the email security products?
No, that's probably because we only see massive malware. I think if you target email security products, which I've heard there is sometimes, it doesn't happen very often, but if you do this kind of thing, then you would probably target a specific organization. You would just, what we see in our lab, as I said, some spammer made a mistake by being not picky enough about which email addresses they send.
So one of the problems that I run into personally with the spam detection software that our company uses is that they insert a lot of headers and rewrite URLs to be able to block them, which makes DMARC verification impossible because now all the checksums and things like that don't match anymore. Do you ever provide feedback to companies trying to tell them, you know, don't be changing the content of the email, don't be rewriting headers and things like that that invalidate these, you know, standard tools like DMARC and DKIM?
I do not. There are ways around this. There's a way to kind of modify, break DKIM, but still tell the next layer that DKIM was all right, and sign it again by saying the DKIM was original there, called ARC. It's not widely used, but yeah, basically if you have one filter that rewrites things and then the next layer starts checking DKIM, then yeah, maybe you're not doing things in the right way. I mean, not for me to tell you how to run your mail, but you, and by you I mean the spam filter, the email security product. Yeah, it is an issue. Yeah.
Hi. What's the most sophisticated attempt you've seen with phishing?
The most sophisticated attacks I see, or that exist in general? Gosh, I'm trying to think what's the most sophisticated. I mean, what the most sophisticated I see is probably Imhotep, because you know this example. You know, it's large enough that still gets blocked, that gets detected, but there's nothing in there that makes you want to, in itself, that makes you realize that should be blocked. I'm trying to think. I mean, I saw something, and just because I saw it like 2 days ago, it's not really email attack, but it was like malware that created a transport agent for Microsoft Exchange, which is it's not really related to this, but it's kind of, yeah, you're really targeting email clients. I'm trying to think of the most sophisticated email attack. I mean, there's only so much sophistication you can put in email itself. I mean, yeah, here's an email, here's an attachment. Yeah. I don't think there's too much sophistication in there. If you compromise an account, send it from there. That's about, especially if it's an account that your target would communicate with in general. Then that's, you know, and this happens as a first step. You compromise someone else. You first compromise HR, and using HR, you're going to compromise the head of finance because that's your real target. Yeah, that's the sort of thing that happens.
Thank you. Is there any particular trend in terms of which segment is more vulnerable to this phishing attacks? I don't know, job description, role, segment, I don't know.
So the ones that I'm looking at is not particularly targeted. So this is, and then I wouldn't say it's more. One particular actually HR, because the job at HR is often to open files that sent by email, and there's a lot of like resume spam where you say, hey, I want to apply for this job. Here's my resume, and it's actually malware. And yeah, as HR, it's not particularly targeted, but it's sometimes it's generic enough that it seems credible for an HR agent. So yeah, I would say any kind of job where part of your job is open attachments from strangers is more vulnerable.
I'm in HR. There's two situations I've seen. One where you get an email where you're getting a job offer, but people are not always smart enough to understand they didn't apply for the job.
Yeah.
But they're going to click on it anyway. The second is typically around open enrollment for benefits, where you'll get a lot of emails and it appears to be coming from the company or from the vendor that handles the benefits.
Yeah.
So
There's a lot of that.
To watch out for.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of that out there as well. Yeah. One particular thing I've seen targeting HR is about resume spam is where there's a password. It's like, hey, I've attached my resume. The password is 1234, and because the malware that's attached is encrypted with a password, the antivirus product doesn't scan it, and we can blame the antivirus products for that. But for privacy reasons, we kind of they don't scan it, and I think they made the right call, but also it bypasses product filters more often. Yeah.
Just as an ancillary to that, a lot of places are recommending that you attach docx files now as resumes rather than PDFs because the software for HR isn't able to read a lot of the PDF content anymore. So they're saying you should attach more docx's.
Yeah, no, and I can even see why they do that. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. Yeah.
For at least against a lot of the malware and some of the phishing, we found a whole bunch of stuff where if you pay a lot of attention to good system security, et cetera, yeah, you may be able to do something to one machine as a user, but we've stopped a lot of the stealing, a lot of the breaking.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering how many other groups have done a lot of security stuff so that even if the user account is broken, they still don't have wide open access to the network.
I think that's the idea that zero trust is based on, is that you assume you can't trust your device on in the same network any more than you can trust the device somewhere else on the internet. That's the same idea, you know. And I think many organizations make a mistake there. That's how these enterprise targeted ransomware attacks go wrong, because you infect one PC on the network, and you can from there encrypt files on the whole network.
But you can only encrypt if somebody allows that kind of access.
Exactly, but a lot of organizations do, and it's easy, and you sometimes need the access. I mean, I try because I don't work in an organization, I don't defend an organization. I think what you're doing is the right approach, but I also
I can see a home user may not be able to figure out how to set a system up securely, but an enterprise system where they supposedly have help desk train people's security policies. Can they not? So,
I mean, I try to be hesitant about criticizing organizations for ultimately doing their job, because that's their focus. Security is always as an add-on. And I've also heard of organizations, like large organizations, that had so strict security policies that people brought in a second internet line to actually do their job. So you can also do too much, like shadow IT. I mean, I get it. That's the sort of thing that I also recommend. But at the same time, yeah, I don't know what choices an organization has to make. And sometimes they might make different choices.
Have you seen any locale-specific campaigns, like things targeting, say, South Korea, where they use Handcom office files as opposed to general office and maybe other locales?
It's interesting. So I know there's a lot of more targeted attacks. You know, South Korea is a main target, especially of North Korea, and there's a lot of it uses Hangul, which is the word processor used there. There's another one that's used on the Indian sub in Pakistan, except, and I forgot the name, but it's also used in more targeted attacks. I have not seen a lot of these spam campaigns in general with local specific software, and I don't know why. Maybe it's still not on my radar. It's a valid question, and yeah.
All right, kind of follow up to my previous question. Do you have open source anti-spam programs in your lab? And
we were testing
which ones?
Scrollhout for a while, which is open source. A lot of the spam software we use based on things like Spam Assassin, which is open source. I think the main the most important part of a spam filter these days is all the reputation data that you have. So the engine itself may be open source, but it's kind of irrelevant. It's a bit like Facebook. A lot of Facebook has open sourced a lot of the tools it uses, but not the social graph, which is like the thing that makes money on it. It's the same thing with a spam filter or an email security product. Like the technology may be open source, but not all the intelligence that they put into it. So.
Okay. Yeah, because I just recently started using our spamd, but of course, on a small server, stuff gets through because the sample is so small for.
Yeah, no. In general, for an organization, I would not recommend. I mean, and I use Linux on my home PC, but I like open source, but I would not recommend something small, unless you really want to play with it a lot. But no, I think using a commercial solution is probably, even something like Gmail, Google's G Suite is probably more cost effective because your time also costs money than using open source. Much as I like open source. But. Wow.
You mentioned earlier issues with the .ace format as sort of a deprecated format.
Yeah.
I work a lot in digital curation, and we see a lot of those things becoming a problem that's why we have to operate on isolated networks. Do you foresee a lot of that? Because a lot of services have dropped support for what they consider deprecated viruses or malware. And seeing sort of some of these objects being sort of ported to a newer version through different things like Imhotep and whatnot to try and sort of get around it because most of the antivirus don't recognize them anymore.
So I think antivirus can recognize it if it wants to. It's more like, is it relevant enough to add it? So yeah, I would assume that something like ACE, that these days all antivirus has detection for this because they know it's a big issue. But yeah, one thing that is a general problem with antivirus, and especially compressed files, like files with files inside it, is that especially the antivirus as it runs on a desktop, which is kind of a different subject than what I'm talking about. But because they try to be as lightweight as possible, sometimes they say, okay, we know it's in a file, but we're not going to unpack it until the user does so, and then we're going to scan it, because it just saves resources. So there's also that. Wow.
All right. Any other questions for our speaker tonight? Of course, if you've got an individual question you want to speak with him afterwards, or to any of us here from Duo, we're more than happy to talk with you. Otherwise, please give our speaker a round of applause. Thank you very much for coming out tonight.
Thank you.